All right. Welcome back to the GSMC Wrestling Laureate podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. Just to kind of reflect on what we talked about real quick, we talked about our WWE NXT review. We talked about our we talked about AEW Dynamite preview, and we're going to move forward with our next segment. We're going to talk about why Tony Khan feels like he needs to constantly rip WWE. But before we move on any further, I want to remind you guys to use the tips and donations link at the GSMCpodcast.net. Give me your questions, comments, concerns, opinions. Just give me a shout out of where you're listening from. Absolutely anything. We'll love to kind of hear from you guys. This is our podcast just as much as it is mine. So this is just wrestling. This is what wrestling's all about, 110%. So yeah, let's go ahead and jump right on into it. So guys, we're gonna talk about how AEW president Tony Khan explains why he takes so many shots at the WWE. In the Rockers morning show, he was asked, AEW president Tony Khan was asked why he takes shots at WWE during interviews and social media, interactions or post events press conferences and stuff like that. He said, and I quote, Tony Khan said in the 90s, certainly, I do think a lot that it fueled the wrestling economy. Very different time. There weren't really things that were online at that time. And he was right. He was right. 110%. I feel like the things that kind of made the Monday Night Wars ultimately seem like they kind of pushed each other to be better. Competition, kind of like iron sharpens iron. I guess you can use that cliche. So what Tony Khan originally wants to do is to kind of do what WCW did with the WWE. It kind of pushed both companies to be really, really great. WCW was great for the longest time. They were winning in the ratings, actually. And WWF obviously came up with the Attitude Era with this, Monday Night Wars, which led to the Ruthless Aggression Era. But I like the way that Tony Khan kind of phrases. He was like, hey, like, if you're the owner or promoter of a wrestling, fanatic or whatever organization, you kind of want to push your guys, kind of a little, obliviously. Like if you have pushback, if you have, comments or concerns, or if you have statements made toward your competition, they're gonna make a rebuttal. They're gonna, take some shots at you back. Your boys are gonna hear it, kind of like what Will Ospreay did with the, Triple H and Tony Storm. Told Tony Khan in the press conference after the match in Dynasty, she was like, "Oh, you didn't have to wait for me to finish my story," kind of mocking, the whole Cody Rhodes kind of thing. But I feel like this was kind of smart. This was, obviously, I kind of knew that this answer would probably come, but you kind of hear it straight from the horse's mouth in this one. And he said it, and quote, he said it makes healthy competition, and that's not bad. That's not like, that's something that a lot of companies should definitely admit a lot more. I know a lot of people definitely like, public relations, especially within the company of AEW and Turner Broadcasting, probably wanted, Tony Khan to kind of say something a little different in terms of his answer, but he was genuine. He was genuine, which is something that Tony Khan is definitely, he excels at, that, something that Vince McMahon never did, Eric Bischoff, whoever. And that's partially some of the reasons why his beloved wrestling promotion is kind of falling wayside, because he cares a lot about his superstars. He befriends everybody. Something that's often said about Tony Khan is, yeah, he's the sweetest guy ever, but he doesn't know how to run a company. And when that usually happens, bad things happen. So, definitely, love Tony Khan for that. So Eric Bischoff, former, WCW executive producer, has always criticized Tony Khan because of this. He's always criticized him, and there's always been a comparison from Eric Bischoff and, and Tony Khan. Um, Eric Bischoff, he fought Vince McMahon, and I know a lot of the times, like Eric Bischoff wants to tell Tony Khan that you kind of have it easier now. You didn't have to face the WWE that I had to face, but in reality, Eric Bischoff, he couldn't take down Vince McMahon. Vince McMahon was, kind of running out of ideas, was not as creative, was hiring kind of like buffoons to run his, writing operations and stuff like that. And you also saw, Eric Bischoff not pushing young talent. You also saw him, pushing himself because of his ego into the WCW, like NWO storylines and stuff like that. Like stuff like that is the reason why your company failed, man. It's not because, you WCW could have very much beaten WWF. But with bad bookings, with bad decision making, definitely got to kind of own up to it, which kind of makes, kind of like gets me to think like, dude, why are you talking mess on Tony Khan, dude? He's kind of doing his best. He's doing his best to kind of, be in this day and age of wrestling. I know nowadays you kind of have social media, kind of like what the NWA, the, National Wrestling Alliance is kind of doing with the, they're not on live TV just yet, but they are streaming on the CW app. So now you have all these apps, all these websites, the YouTube channel, Twitch. You can broadcast your wrestling show absolutely anywhere, and if you have loyal fans, you can get them to tune in week after week after week, which is good. Which is good. Definitely something that Eric Bischoff probably shouldn't be crapping on. But yeah, honestly, I feel like this is kind of like an ego. I feel like that Eric Bischoff always wanted to beat Vince McMahon, but he never could. He could never beat Vince McMahon. He wanted so bad, when he was doing his thing with WCW, where he, showed up in a chopper in the middle of the ring, and he's like, "We beat WWF, man. We beat those bastards." And then, like when he was on commentary, and they showed, Monday Night Raw, which was kind of like a forbidden thing, but Eric Bischoff did it anyway. He's like, "Hey, don't worry about turning that television channel. WCW will keep, hot things coming your way. You have the same boring stuff happening over at the WWF. Stay tuned to WCW Monday Night Nitro." Like, and it's just like, dude, like, I I don't think it's jealousy. I don't want to say it's jealousy because if Eric Bischoff probably had a lot more opportunities that social media, online references, websites, basically the world of technology and internet that he would have had back in the day. I felt like the fight between WWF and WCW would have never been solved. It would have been, show after show after show, constantly competing for ratings, which would have been badass. I felt like none of the companies would have like either bought out the other ones, but obviously what happened kind of happened, and I feel like Eric Bischoff is he might be a little jelly in terms of that. So, you know, he always been a second fiddle to Vince, like we kind of talked about before. And I don't know. I feel like Eric Bischoff has this personal hatred toward Tony Khan because AEW is constantly being compared to the WCW, which is, kind of something that Tony Khan admitted. He was like, something that me and Eric, we know. And he said himself, he's like, I respect Eric to like the crap ton. I have mad respect for what he did in WCW, but he constantly, criticizes our show. But we were both on the Turner Network. We were on TBS, TNT. So I think Eric Bischoff at this moment, like if he's ever kind of, immersed in a sentence that considers, takes Tony Khan and Eric Bischoff in the same sentence, I think that gets to him. I think like he doesn't like that, which probably, is the reason why he constantly criticizes poor Tony Khan. But yeah, Tony Khan and like I said, he said, and I quote, he said, "I do respect his accomplishments. He has a show, he has a podcast that is largely devoted to taking shots at us, meaning taking shots at AEW. Which is right, which is right. But this just makes you think about Eric Bischoff. Is Eric Bischoff any much more different than Vince McMahon? I don't think so. I really honestly don't think so. In an interview, he said that if the shoe was on the other foot, if WCW would have, assimilated or accumulated or bought WWF, he would have buried those guys just the way that Vince did, which was ultimately the worst decision you can possibly do. WCW during Invasion, you had a bunch of young superstars that were brushed under the rug. That superstars like Lance Storm, Buff Bagwell, Booker T had to work his ass off. You had Scott Steiner, you had DDP that they booked, and DDP as like a stalker of the Undertaker's wife, which was absolutely redonkulous. But they just threw these guys under the rug, threw them to the meat broiler, and Eric Bischoff, like, even after seeing what WWF could have possibly done if they would have done WCW right, and he would have done the same thing. He said WCW, if, I would have rubbed it in their face too. Be like, yeah, we're better than your superstars. I would have put them in shit programming, bad bookings, and stuff like that. Like, even after you saw what happened to WWF and kind of how the viewership kind of declined, you would honestly go ahead and have the balls to kind of go out there and be like, I would have done the same thing. that's just, I don't know. For me, I know in my opinion, I just think that's that's stupid. That's absolutely dumb. Definitely think that Tony Khan is doing the best that he can with what, in terms of the WWE. And sometimes, I would see his thoughts in WWE, and I kind of knew that what he was doing in the long run, that he was ultimately kind of like, pushing that fight with kind of like the Monday Night Wars like they did with WCW. But, ultimately, you still kind of have guys like Eric Bischoff thinking that they're the world's most smartest wrestling promoters, or like, the storyline writers. So, hey man, all power to you. All power to you. So guys, don't go anywhere. We're gonna move on to Paul Heyman possibly kind of moving on from the bloodline. What would happen if he's kicked out of the bloodline? We're gonna jump into it right after this.